All right, so thanks everybody for being here. Thanks for participating in the exercise. I know, sometimes those aren't the funnest things to do, so I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you got a sense of what I'm going to talk about today. And the reason we do that is, I can tell you that the structure of a network matters versus actually participating in an exercise where you see those things. And so what we want to do today is kind of talk about this in the context of criminal networks and how it matters for understanding crime causation. So as I mentioned, or as Owen mentioned, my name is Jacob Young. I've been doing network research for about 15 years. If you want to know more about the work I do, you can check out my website, or you can just scan the QR code and that'll take you there. And there's a lot more content there if you're interested. But today, what I want to do is basically give you a sense of the way network scientists think about criminal justice and criminology problems as they relate to criminal behavior. So why do networks matter is the question that we want to get at. And so to do this, let's think of a very fine news source in the United States, The Onion. So this is an article from The Onion. Do you know what The Onion is? Okay, good. I'm glad you have the pleasure of getting to read The Onion. So for those who don't know, The Onion is a satirical news from the United States, which actually does a good job reflecting the tone of a lot of things. I highly recommend it. But the article I want to talk about today is Sudden Death of Aunt Creates Rupture in Family Gossip Pipeline. So Virginia Beach, Virginia, grieving family members of local Aunt Lori Shelton confirmed Monday that the 48-year-old woman's unexpected death had caused a major breach in their gossip pipeline, suddenly disrupting access to the latest dirt on all their relatives. Since Aunt Lori passed, news about how Stephanie's new boyfriend can't hold down a job and updates on Uncle Jeff's gambling habit have slowed to a trickle, said Shelton's niece Ariel, mourning the loss of a woman who for years had reportedly ensured a steady stream of the juiciest tidbits about relatives' layoffs, unplanned pregnancies, personal bankruptcies, and misdemeanor shoplifting charges. All the best gossip flowed through her, and now she's gone. For all I know, the twins in North Carolina could have been caught smoking pot, Grandma could be back together with Leon, and Uncle Mike could be considering a vasectomy. It's a devastating loss for the whole family. Several in the family expressed hope that for the time being, a sufficient supply of idle chatter could be rerouted through Cousin Stacy to meet their immediate needs. So the joke here, I hope that you get, is that a lot of families are like this. My family's certainly like this. But this idea that there's somebody in the family who likes to gossip. And it's not a personality thing, it's about the structure of gossip in that family. And so what happened in this story? Right, so Aunt Lori passes away, and it changes the transmission of gossip in that network. In network science, we call it a network intervention. So some change to the network, whether it's a change to a particular actor or a set of actors or to some links in that network, that alters what that network does in a causal sense. And so the Shelton family experienced a network intervention, a change in the network. And so the easiest way to see this is just take a look at the picture. So we have the gossip network of the Shelton family. In the middle is Aunt Lori, and she passes away. That's the new network after the intervention. And so what's the consequence? Nobody can get any gossip. Nobody knows what's going on with the juicy tidbits in the family. And so this isn't about a particular type of person. It's about a change in the relationships or the flow of information because of someone leaving that network. And a lot of intervention or network intervention research in criminal networks is based on this idea of targeting specific persons who disrupt the network. And that gets us this idea of vulnerability in networks. And so the family gossip pipeline for the Sheltons was vulnerable to being disrupted. So you have gossip, it all depended on her being there, and if you just remove that one person, it's all gone. Network interventions built on this idea identify vulnerable network structures based on information, whether it's collected from police officers or other types of criminal justice actors, and seeks to figure out what the network's like. Now, a more resilient network could have some ties between other members, and the death of Aunt Lori wouldn't disrupt as much the gossip network. This would be a more resilient and less vulnerable network. So just as gossip spreads through a network, so do many things in criminal justice context, whether it's drugs, money, people. Those are all things that can go through relationships. And so understanding the network matters. And that's kind of the basis of network science as it applies to criminology and problems in criminal justice, is that to understand the problem and to identify a potential solution revolves a lot around recognizing that network structures matter and understanding what that structure is like. So let me give you an example from a few years ago on trying to understand criminal enterprise in Italy. And so what had been going on is the local police had been monitoring criminal behavior in separate areas. And so you had a local police force kind of looking into this group, then you had a different police force looking into this group in a different city, and so on and so on. And so independently, these agencies were trying to disrupt these groups or understand what they were up to and find a way to reduce their behavior. But through a higher level intervention, through wiretaps and understanding other ways of communication, what they realized is that all these local groups were actually organized at a higher level, hierarchically. And so there was these kind of main individuals who had a higher level organizational structure that were coordinating criminal enterprise in these local areas. And so realizing this, that this was a highly connected network, the organization targeted these individuals at the top and seek to reduce behavior through targeting them. And so the idea here is that the structure of the network influenced what should be done, what the intervention should look like. Because if it's like this, where you have a bunch of disconnected groups, then you might need specific interventions for each of those local contexts. Versus one where they're organized by a couple of key players, then it might be a better strategy to target those individuals to disrupt the entire network. And that's essentially what they did, is they went and arrested these black nodes and removed them, and it led to widespread disruption of the organized element here. But the other consequence of targeting those groups was that not only were these individual level local groups disconnected from each other through that main key player, but the activity at the local level was also disrupted. And so that their lack of supplies or funds in one context affected the other group. And so it led to an overall decline at the local level as well. So that's an example of how networks matter in a context where you have stuff kind of flowing through a network and you have people coordinating the flow of those things. Let me give you another example. So you might have heard that in the United States there was, or there still is, although it's receded somewhat, over the last 20 to 30 years, there was a massive problem with opioid addiction in the United States. And so a natural question is like, why did this happen? And so the basic problem was during the late 80s, 90s, and 2000s, there was a rapid acceleration in the use of opioid medication for pain relief and addiction from that. That was followed after some legal restrictions by a rapid rise in the use of heroin. And as a consequence of those two things, there was rapid increase in deaths associated with opioid use and addiction. That was then followed by fentanyl overdose and misuse. So why did this happen? And so one thing is you could say, well, that's a period where maybe more people were in pain. So you have more people experiencing pain, so you have more people being prescribed medication, and so as a consequence, you just get more people addicted, and then that leads to this kind of spiraling out of control. Another argument is that maybe doctors were seeking more patients, and so you have doctors essentially kind of targeting patients. This also coincides with more corporatization of healthcare in the United States. And so one argument is that doctors are being kind of pushed by pharmaceutical firms to prescribe more of this medication, and that kind of snowballed itself. So that's one argument. Another argument that's come up recently is that this is more of a network phenomenon. And so information in these communities, in local communities, spread through networks about opioid use. So a lot of this was in the Midwest, particularly the West Virginia region of the United States. And so you have information about, you're in pain, you tell somebody else about this medication, you went to the doctor, it's solving problems. That information spreads through workplaces, it spreads through friendships, but there's some emerging research talking about the importance that social media played in diffusing information and essentially kind of making it safe to use this medication. And so when they go back and look at some of the records of what was being said, you might have an individual who has some pain, they go to the doctor, they're prescribed medication, and then they go into a forum for whatever group they're in, and then they talk about, I had this pain, I went to the doctor, they prescribed this medication, it's working very effectively, I'm not getting any side effects, I can function just fine. And individuals are hearing that information from somebody who's like them, and they can kind of relate, and then that influences them. And then so maybe they go get the medication also. And it leads to this kind of reinforcement of, I hear more people in my kind of social community telling me the same message. And for that person who really maybe needs to hear it from a lot of people, that convinces them as well. And so you have this gradual transmission of information through a network, but it's also because there's multiple people saying the same thing that it reinforces that message. And it led to, and this is the argument from this network view, is that it led to this kind of escalation of people seeking out medication because they had this information from people who were like them about the solution to a very real problem of pain relief. And so in this picture, you have people changing their behavior because other people around them, and enough people around them are changing their behavior and giving them information, versus somebody else who might only hear it from one person. So Jim is taking this medication, but I'm not hearing anybody else really talk about it, so it doesn't really influence my behavior. So the relationships reinforce behavior change. So the reason I give this example is there's an analog in criminal justice on focused deterrence. So how many people are familiar with the focused deterrence approach? So the basic idea is, and this is a very simplified version, is in contrast to general deterrence, where we say we're going to make this law more restrictive or more punitive, and if you violate that law, you're going to go to prison for longer or suffer more sanctions of some kind. Focused deterrence targets specific individuals, and it reaches out to those individuals to inform them of the consequences of their behavior. And so the way this usually works is, and the examples that have been effective, has been on gun violence, and so reducing gun violence in the United States. And so one piece of focused deterrence was taking individuals who were releasing from prison and telling them, when you go back to the community, if you go get a gun and you're caught with a gun, you're going to go to prison immediately. You're not going to go on probation. The consequences are going to be very severe. But at the same time that they're making that reach out to those people to tell them about the deterrent effects, they're also linking them to resources. And so if you're done with this sort of life, you can, we'll help you find an ID, we'll help you get a job, we'll help you get signed up for the services you have. And so it's using the prosecutor's office and the police department to target specific problematic individuals from their perspective, to provide them with resources, but also to make it clear about the deterrent effects. It's a very different approach than a general deterrence framework. But a key piece of focused deterrence is built on networks. And so in addition to telling people that we're going to come down hard on you if you get in trouble again, there's some resources available for you if you decide not to pursue that life, it also relies on them spreading that information through their networks. And so it says, okay, let your friends know, let other people in the gang know that this is what we're going to do. If we start having problems with guns or other types of gang conflict, conflict in the neighborhood, we're going to arrest all of you, and everybody's going to be held to account for this. If not, we're happy to help all of you get resources. And so if you have friends in your gang or in your neighborhood who need help getting access to services, have them come in, and we're going to help them. And so it's spreading, it's using those networks, those in most cases, these kind of criminal networks, to spread information about how the prosecutor's office is going to respond, but also the resources that are available to solve the problem. And so the existing network is used to spread that information, rather than just sort of a general sense of making a change of the law, which most people aren't going to be familiar with anyways. It's using existing networks and using active participants in those networks to spread information. So focused deterrence, that's just one piece of focused deterrence. There's multiple elements there. Has been fairly effective, at least in the sites that's been tried. So why networks matter? So I give you a couple examples. Criminal justice agencies often face situations that involve networks, and by leveraging the tools of network analysis, agencies can gain new insights and develop novel approaches and solutions. So network science has many applications, whether it's youth justice workers and probation officers, uncovering hidden links, maybe influential individuals in that person's life that they could maybe encourage them to reduce their contact with, or people who are maybe potentially good resources that they could increase interaction with. Law enforcement, as in the example I told you about, targeting influential individuals in organized crime. Agency management, so identifying people who might benefit most from an intervention. And so some of the research in the health literature finds that health interventions often work well if you can get a whole group of people together and get them all to do that intervention together. So some of the studies on smoking cessation practices is if you can get a group of people and get them all to kind of do it together, then that group ends up being really effective than if you try people individually, because the network ends up reinforcing what's going on. Prisons, anticipating potential escalation among conflicting groups. This is some of the work comes out of gang conflict in neighborhoods. And crime prevention, so enhancing intelligence gathering, building trust in the communities and cooperation, and getting support from the community. So there's a lot of applications. These are just kind of a few. Okay, so I'm going to have you get back in your groups. And what I want you to do is, you don't have to reorganize your chairs how you had them. You can do them whatever's comfortable. What I want you to do is think about an agency problem and how a network perspective might help solve that problem. And so I know you're coming from different places here. So if you can kind of think of, as he was going through this, it made me think of this or that. And that's kind of what the discussion we'd like to have. So if we can have you go ahead and split up. Or before you split up, is there any questions about kind of what I went through, any comments? But if you're ready to split up and start talking, we can do that. Good? All right, yeah, go ahead and split up.
We go back into the same groups?
Yes, yeah.
Any prizes?
I got a gift card. So that's the end. Do you want to go ahead and stop on the recording, or do you want to keep going for discussion? Okay. Okay. Yeah, we can just hover around. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I guess what we can do is let them discuss for a little bit, and then we'll come back and say, what'd you come up with? Yeah.
Because I like
Okay, yeah.
pulling levers, stuff like
Yeah.
How long is this batch?
I think we'll go probably about 10 to 15 minutes. So do you want to just keep going?
Cut it out. Just leave it.
Okay.
Leave it recorded.
Yeah.
Cut it
Yeah.
out.
I think what we'll do is have them talk a little bit, and then we'll circle back and just kind of touch base with each group and see what they talked about.
Yeah. Look, we can leave the mic on.
Okay.
Just cut it out at the end.
Sounds good. Thank you. You want to close them? Or? Okay. Oh, okay.
It's just really slow.
I was like, what are you doing? Well, that's pretty neat. Oh, okay. Oh, yeah. Usually. So anything come to mind? Or
Yeah, there's an example here. This is more in the organisation as opposed to.
oh, okay, cool. So, what were you thinking? Kind of chat about.
It's just a real life kind of circumstance. Now to relate. So basically, there was quite some money that was right, just come up, but this type of thing happens all the time. So I linked in with the CEO of the organisation to let her know this is what's happening. This is my intended actions that I'm going to follow up with. But there's CEO, there's the program manager, and then there's the line manager.
Mhm.
I suppose all three then are kind of contacting me individually. So it's like I'm having to relay the same piece of information. While it's, I suppose the crisis is still in progress, and trying to respond to that and be present for that. So I suppose that that was something I had flagged or identified that this is something like three different people messaging me about the same thing, whereas you guys could have linked them together or could communicate with one person and that could be filtered out.
Yeah.
So straight away you're kind of
No, it's a good example. And so what's a solution? A solution to that? Is it something that's like put everybody on the same email, or
well, I think in that moment when you're in the midst of it, it's like understanding that there is, I suppose, a flow of information that's been, it might go to one, and then that person then channels that information
Yeah.
Down to the other parties. Another, I suppose, a technical kind of thing is like, okay, if I have an emergency group chat, that's set up, they're only used in case like this, where the same information is being delivered
Yeah.
and received by all the parties.
Yeah.
So there's no miscommunication, we all know where each other are.
okay, yeah. So pretty straightforward technological solution. What else? What other good stuff came to mind?
We've started retail intelligence units in our organisation, and so I suppose it's exactly what you were referring to there. Traditional law enforcement about instead of individual district detective units or whatever targeting groups, that we would have more of an overview of what's happening and have your priority targets and try and target bigger people.
Yeah.
And I suppose we would have more resources and more capabilities then that would be available to divisions or to district units. So before that definitely was a national unit would do it, and it's just being devolved slowly now. So from that perspective, we can see how it works.
Okay, yeah.
If you take our three examples, or our three scenarios here,
Yeah.
okay, this was obviously the most effective to get the message quickly, or to get the communication. But for the likes of so that's a barrier
Yeah.
to it, that you have to obviously be careful as to who's being responded.
Yeah, I mean it's like this is the reply all email versus the who needs to know, right?
And it's
so
funny because it is an issue, with us.
A lot of it is this here,
Yeah.
it's going through and you're feeding it to who needs to know.
Mhm.
So
Because you've different
But is that clear that are allowed to, things like one source and then, build expectation of how stuff that's happening now, it's beginning to happen now, it's sort of parties in relation or can be something very,
expect nothing. Yeah.
a lot of times you would know a lot more than you would be able to give operational units. But then you're trying to give them a package, intelligence package to go and act and probably make arrests or do searches. And you're not telling them everything you know because you can't. So it creates conflict there then.
yeah. Yeah, I mean one of the big things that came out after September 11th in the United States about intelligence gathering was the way it was structured is everybody pushes stuff up, and then you have a person who decides whether it keeps going, and there's multiple people like that, and it basically just all goes like this. And one of the things was if there was some lateral discussions, they could have made, now it's easy after the fact, but that was one kind of communication gap is like everything goes up this way instead of having some things go this way, and they look different. But most organizations are structured in that hierarchical way, and that makes sense a lot of times. That you just push stuff up, and that person in that role decides whether it needs to go up or whether it's relevant. Yeah. Other stuff that came into mind. Or? Yeah, hopefully it was interesting and useful. Yeah. So I think what we'll do is probably have each group kind of maybe talk about one example that they discussed, and so just to have something there if you want.
Something like 80% of what the police do is not to do with crime, it's to do with things around the and health care. And it's the same in the UK. So, I mean, changing the policing should be focused on harm. And so, like, if you're doing those talks to kids, do it with agencies that are experts in the problem.
What's the issue?
You just add your bit. You know,
How's it going over here? Sounds like police officers in the U.S. It's just most of what they deal with isn't what they signed up for the job for. But the police are the only people open 24/7 when it comes to calling about emergencies. So.
Guard response from a criminal perspective.
That's interesting, because even if you look at the past of anything that's been introduced in the community, that the personnel needed from the health service, thinking about how can we solve that problem without just being able to fit somebody in. We're the guards, that's the health person, we're missing the health person, so we can't do anything. It seems to me like it's crying out for a different type of approach. There must be other ways of managing those post 5 o'clock type problems that are coming to the guards.
That's really very, well, it will be very beneficial. As a pilot scheme, to be rolled out for the rest of the country, you can't get the initial one up and running, how's it going to work through? Yeah, how's it going to work through the country?
The thing is that it's coming from a different type of approach. One of the things that has gone into the new police and security act is that harm reduction is a role for the police. That's acknowledged that's part of what they do most of the time. So, like if that pilot focused in that way, like say even the police, instead of waiting for somebody to meet us, is there training that the guards can get certain, I think guards are getting the opioids. It's that trained in the use of, that thing where you can inject somebody.
Narcan.
Yeah, that type of thing. So there must be other things where it's not just like waiting for someone to before. That seems to be, it's not really embracing the new approach. I'm not saying it's anyone's fault. How are the guards, say, embracing the idea, like, you know, that really, actually, a lot of them just not professional ones. But how are the guards embracing the idea of doing that?
This discussion going.
We're just talking about how you disrupt various things. You read a lot of criminal networks really.
Oh, okay.
We edged it that way. Maybe I didn't. Simply me.
One thing, qualified medical plumber, highly respected within the plumbing community. His kids, they go to respectable schools, everything. Neil says to me, actually his neighbours might didn't know what they are, but they mightn't be aware of what his actual activity is. But to try and catch him, that
He
will
will
never
way
be
harder.
that.
At least in what we're talking about, to see it.
But they say, how does that happen with his kids? What happens with his kids? You know what I mean?
There's timing is really important as well as this. So we kind of looked into this idea of signaling theory, right? So if a young person is after being stabbed and they're in a hospital bed, right, that's potentially a good time to offer to go way out, right? So timing can be really important. A lot of times these lads they could be dead, drug dead, they could be dead. Then you maybe that might be a time that you can try and do something. Opportunities.
So the exit,
Yeah.
we are very
Yeah, it is.
limited
So what you can offer, you see, we're very tight in that regard.
no alternative.
Mm.
Like, there is no carrot.
Yeah.
Because that's seen as enhancement.
Well,
So there's something we're trying at the moment that we're involved in called Green Club Program, which is an opportunity for young people to begin an extra. It's not your normal care person. It's more extreme. It's based on the scheme model of NST. Giving kids a way out. And even things like if they're on drug to see how they can be worked around with people who know person and then giving them a whole range of different things that can be available. It's worth looking into because it's an opportunity. Like RIU will be that police officer like yourselves, people would figure that there is actually one or two new things that might be out there. Now I'm not saying that you guys can offer that. You'd have to engage with a service that provides a service like what extra might be able to do in the future. Like Michelle's role now around that phase to provide really intensive support for lads that are on that risky zone of out bail, you know what I mean? Like,
it's like criminals react to their environment change. And say like the instructions to go or whatever that
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And younger, under 12, yeah,
If the child will work at the old age of criminal responsibility, they know that they can cost them 2 or 3 chances of jail before they're coming. Especially with the drug, because drug deaths is
Turn it around.
that whole really big logistics is no way.
Is this still actually family like that?
Parents don't pay.
Parents have it over.
Yeah, of course.
Doesn't owe them.
So when you see there,
And
Yeah.
see there's centralized captures or bullets that hit the door. Who suggested that this is this drug scheme, or if it's the son or daughter
go away, let's do it.
who's extorting their parents as desperate. So like they so that will exploit everyone. They are being exploited.
And unfortunately, I suppose from our perspective, the amount of extortion and blackmail and deaths that are not reported, I'd say they are, I think it's probably 90% unreported, 10%. You know?
Yeah,
Never did.
Oh, no. Their best version.
Why not have you to just ask one question before we probably have to go back? Where do you see effective in town? Can you examples of like, okay, we took out one or two guys here that actually really affected the whole day? Or is it like just a case of
So fast, I'm only looking at West Park, you know, like, say, took one family out of maybe,
yeah.
it's still
No,
yeah.
cocaine has gone through, of course, you can go to any drug release centers, so you have recreation, choices of colleges, so there's always going to be some we go and take 2 or 3 key players out of that, and we think
And they all have their disciplinary links back out for expert, you know, as needed targeted support, the more intensive support they are linked.
One of our
Like
interventions, we
next
used
to
to
the social work,
network interventions, you know, and we did actually
and
do
fixed work or whatever.
with this young man who was on our program, they couldn't get best off doing that for who we would have called at the time #1, you know, in the area. And like what he explained everything was going to be picked up, was going to be charged, so the guys did, so and stuff like that. It worked fantastic for that young person, but afterwards, like on reflection, straight away. #3 was it, so it was brilliant for our young lads, it worked
And you
fabulous.
can't do that for everyone.
Completely, it
Yeah.
scared the drug dealer to not trust him again, so it, you know what I mean, it really worked beautiful, but in the greater scheme of
Yeah,
things,
of course,
it did,
yeah.
you know what I mean, and the
Yeah.
guards can't, you can't bring them every day.
And the resources
What will you
that,
do?
the
Yeah.
resources that go into that,
I do.
was, if you had an amount of drugs that's €100 or €500 or 5,000, the amount of resource that goes into that to be replaced, there'd be another person coming in. For me, if you follow drugs, you get drug dealers and drug users. Money in the ass, because at the end of the day, if you have an extra €1,000 a week to spend, you have to spend it. It's targeting that lifestyle. It's feeding that back into businesses and it's targeting that. Because in drugs, when you stop the supply of drugs coming through,
It's funny you say because just on the news last night, was it the big operation that the Russians putting under a gang and taking down over involved with killings or whatever, it was a joint European US operation actually, so yeah, it's quite interesting.
How hard is it to
Maybe
find out?
crypto now and
Yeah.
but assets, I suppose the traditional assets of, I suppose people will go back to watches and they go back to those kind of things because they're very transferable. And what through your airport, €250,000 equivalent crypto, so then here, it's moving through jurisdictions. Money leaves a trail.
Yeah.
It's identifying the businesses. It's very easy to find a drug dealer here.
Yeah.
You know, but it's the legitimate businesses.
That's no problem, but I think Southern region has, a cash perspective. Like, we could send them as a road cab profile, but the cab is constructed. And they come down, maybe more so for
dealing with.
3 years, they come down to
Like, they really like, it's a criminal assets bureau, so they will seize assets that they or bought by people purposes.
Oh, okay. Yeah, we have that. Asset forfeiture.
Yeah. We set up on the back of like really like the 90s, pretty high
Southern region,
profile
and
gangs that were just running out of the really killed it, really prominent journalists and that was
focus on the red.
Oh, okay. Oh.
There's not much.
Oh, what is this? Oh, yeah. There was, or might quite be right.
It goes very important for, you have to commit criminality as well, and the difference in races when you're following assets and you're following.
There's an awful lot more in that as well, I know what you mean,
a weak links, would that be an option? Find a weak links, people that will turn on each other. Like I did one in Dublin, so we looked at, there was 4 criminal fighting operations in this area. So I didn't know names, but just we know the numbers. And one of the things that I found, the weakest networks were the lads who were facing big census. They didn't really from the same area, they weren't family. And they were turning on each other all over the shop. And they're actually giving evidence against it, they're going away for a long time because it was a weak network. It wasn't a family. It was a strong network. They were guys who really care about each other. You know, you're not going to rat your brother, but you're going to rat some fella out the road. Like, you know, so you kind of notice a bit of difference in ended those games. But you see your coach type organizations, they were very structured and hard to infiltrate because they were trained not to infiltrate, to not be infiltrated. They were trusted lieutenants.
I suppose as well as that, there's a sanction.
Yeah, I imagine in the drugs game. Yeah.
Like at the end of the day, drugs is run by elite violence, hand in hand, the trilogy of cash, violence, and drugs. And if you're not violent, follow your money. I believe you're not going to knock on the door. They're not going to pay back. So you lose your status and credibility. So you need to be able to, when the time comes, enforce. Pull that trigger. You know, some of the best of them are very good businessmen.
But they have to really be doing this for them.
The younger ones.
And the threat, like, even Eddie's doing, whether it's a really big guy, you're not expecting this. This is when there's 17 or 18-year-old, 5 foot, whatever it is. But this perception of this really, really physical dominance. It's very
That's signaling theory also, right? It's like I've sent the signal that like I am legitimately violent and awful, but then if you prove it. Yeah, the fear of violence. I mean, it's.
You're all okay. Pass the parcel.
Would you say well on the education?
You want to circle back? Only 20 after, but I guess we could circle back for about 10, 15 minutes. Okay. Okay, let's we'll come back together as a group, and what we want to do is have each group talk a little bit about kind of what they discuss as it pertains to networks, anything you'd like to chat about, and the way the other groups can hear. And so, does any group want to go first?
Show-offs over there.
The winners.
The win. Yeah.
They felt the need to super cartel.
So actually, Helen, I don't think I got a chance to hear you guys talk any. So do you want to mention?
We started off quite light-heartedly about how it'd be interesting to map the family WhatsApp groups. I think I'm possibly the aunt. So we did that, and then I suppose we moved more into a broader conversation around, I suppose, for an agency's perspective in regards around, the challenges in addressing drug crime. But we moved more into a space of the need to be able to build positive networks, more so than looking at the negative or the networks that cause harm and breaking those links, about building the networks that are positive and the pro-social links. And we then moved on the conversation then around, at an agency level, the networks between agencies. And one thing that came very clear, and I suppose really was very clear to me from being in the structure that I was earlier, where I was a centre point, that if you have a network, an agency network based on that type of system, there's a core centre point of a lot of people working together, and that centre point has to be resourced. And I found when I was the centre point, without my pen and paper to write down what I was hearing, my ability to do the job was weakened. So that really brought the point, if you're going to set up a network at agency level, on that basis, that the centre node has to be exceptionally resourced, has to be resilient to, you know, attack, for want of a better word, or weakening.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
guys want to add?
Well, I was going to say the focus on positive networks is important, right? So, I mean, the same stuff works the other way around, of identifying positive networks that might be vulnerable to being disrupted and trying to make them more resilient. And so, are there a couple of people you can really focus on to really strengthen that network, and it makes it less vulnerable to being disrupted? Yeah, the same logic applies both ways. Other thoughts from the other groups, the other two groups?
Like, I suppose one of the aspects that we did talk about was, like, I suppose the positive kind of net that needs to be there. Like, say, if we're looking at the intervention to take place with a vulnerable young person, you can almost see the trajectory that they will probably, you know, take in life that could be, you know, I suppose have negative consequences. It's like the earlier the intervention, obviously, will I suppose reduce and mitigate the chances of those negative, you know, consequences happening. And it's that interagency piece has to be there, you know, and it's sadly it's not, you know, in a lot of the communities and marginalised communities, it doesn't exist, you know, where things, if there was open dialogue and communication between the different players, the different stakeholders, you know, it's like a lot of the stuff that we see could have been, I suppose, it could have been reduced a lot sooner, you know, whereas like if those positive kind of players are, I suppose, not directly intervening, but depending if it's age appropriate, so as the young person gets older, when they reach the age of 15, you're not slowing down that speeding train that's like, you know, going to derail at any moment, you know. And it's I think it's important that that interagency piece happens much sooner, and that, you know, that network exists and is intact and is reinforced, you know. Just following up from that point.
Yeah, that's a good point, and that's something that you hear a lot of in the work, in this field of work, is more interagency partnerships, communications, and that sort of thing. So I think the question is, like, why don't those things exist then? If they're needed, like, why don't we have them? And you can't say resources or everybody's too busy, because those are true answers of being taxed on resources, and time you do for that is time that takes away from other things. And there are other, it could be as simple as that, but do you see other reasons why there aren't more of those collaborations?
I think a lot of agencies work in their own program. They don't work around the issue or the problem. They work in a programmatic way, and that's the reason they were established. You know, so and now when we realise that problems have multi-layers and are far more complex, agencies, it's a big job to get them to change their way of working, so that they are working like in a more seamless way to focus on what the problem is now. So in a more agile way to be able to follow. Like we were talking at the end about, it started off with talking about kids being given drug education by guards in schools, which we all remember in school, like presented with drugs, and but the context is drugs are bad, just say no was always the original thing, which just is meaningless to young people. So coming back to that point, one of the things where a network could be, like I'd say, I have a daughter now who's just going 13. She's on multiple WhatsApp groups at that age, and it's almost impossible to access what's going on. So it's about how do you find ways, let's say when they are experimenting, as they will be, and when they offer drugs or whatever, as they will be, how do you get something into that network that provides useful information and helpful support and all of those things that you never got by doing those classroom visits, but finding a way of intervening in that network in a positive and supportive ways, so that, let's say, somebody in that network of friends, if they're offered something, say no, don't do that because of this reason, or if you're going to do that, drink loads of water or whatever, because these are the side effects. So, and that, doing what you suggested there, was like, then you have like the person coming out of prison, so long before it gets that extreme, but then you have them working within the network, providing positive information and positive support. So it's that diffusion effect. So you're using the network in a positive, in a positive way. And yeah, so I think there's loads of potential, but I think things happen so fast that agencies, and they're already overwhelmed.
Yeah.
So with what they're doing, but sometimes these problems are so dynamic that it's very difficult for the agencies. It's like a ship. It's very difficult for it to turn. By the time it turns, the problem's moved on.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point of, it's almost as if you need to just create a new agency that has different goals and roles for actors. But you made a good point in that, due to changes in technology, you might have someone who's using an app and there's all these people in communication together. That's a great opportunity to expose them to a certain kind of information. Say, maybe have a discussion about this. Do you have friends who maybe talk about these things? Or, and that's one of the things they've encouraged some social media platforms to do. Of, you might be playing this certain game, and if you watch this ad about information about drug use, you get 5 extra minutes on the game, or so using something like that to encourage information. So it's the same thing as the opioid addiction network problem of exposure and reinforcement of information, but the information's different, and trying to reinforce these ideas about healthy behaviors.
Within, I suppose, my own organisation, and again based on research that I've been kind of undergoing, is that the necessity for that interagency piece has to be there, and it's someone has to be beaten on the drum. You know what I mean? Someone has to be, knocking on the door and holding people, holding, I suppose, organisations accountable in the way that, like, it does, I suppose, create that model of the communication is a free flow across, and it's why is it only because now they've gotten to an age where they've picked up, a number of charges that now they're only being, flagged or identified, whereas that could have been done so much earlier. And I suppose for me, I tend to kind of go out and create my own networks, within schools, within, social work, and so I might have those kind of conversations that we can, I suppose, support the family or support a young person, and but it shouldn't be on the individual, it should be on the organisations to actually really establish those networks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It doesn't exist.
Yeah, a lot of times, in my experience working with the prison system, is the incentives aren't there. It's just we've had lots of people cooperate with us on lots of projects, and a lot of time it's just they're taking time out of the work they already have to do, and it's not because they're going to get a bonus for this or anything like that, but maybe restructuring or thinking about restructuring the incentives people have. But that takes a lot of coming together and changing things when people are already really busy and under-resourced. So it's a tough problem. Other thoughts? So this side of the room, does this side of the room have anything to say?
No, I do agree with you put up a slide earlier there about the 4 different groups with no boss or no and I think that's probably where we're at in this country or jurisdiction at the moment in relation, especially for juvenile diversion away from crime and stuff like that. The guards are this group doing their thing, the diversion, the probation and stuff are doing their own thing. So there's no exactly the left hand side. So we've no 3 dots in the middle there. You know what I mean? We've no one connecting the pieces in, and but as I say, it could be done because that's what the Boston gun project was. There was a specific problem, I suppose, there, and a network was established to deal with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
that's those people in power there at the time that realised this problem, recognised this problem, and dealt with it. And
yeah, it's a good point of
innovative.
How do you go from the one on the left to the
John,
right?
The example that we used was CAB. We'd love to have a unit of that in the south, because predominantly they're focused on Dublin and that region, you know what I mean? And as I was saying, over the last couple of years, I can only recollect maybe 2 or 3, times that CAB have visited Cork, and there would be a huge amount of I suppose, targets that I could name to them in the morning, do you know what I mean, with the paperwork to back it up. Do you know what I'm saying? So it's grand to have CAB, it sounds great, but we shouldn't just be focusing on Dublin or its outskirts, it's nationwide,
And there's a conversation about follow the money, I think, because expendable players
in a drug dealing network in a community will be replaced. But like, how do you affect a massive change? Maybe it's a follow the money type scenario Dave was suggested, because that's where you could really affect some change. You know, get rid of the financial side of the house and take out them links in order to create a different kind of a connection on the ground.
And I think we were initially thinking about just, we'd say, the bottom tier kind of, where the families where, you know, their mother and father are doing it all along and they know no different, they're reared into it. Whereas like, you're also thinking go up a level and you have like people who are introduced to it by their friends, and then you're saying they come from decent backgrounds, whatever, and then you're talking a total different network then again, because their family don't want to be associated with it. But yet here, one of their kids is very proactive within that group or whatever. So, you know, I suppose you have to just, it opens your eyes to the fact that there are so many different levels and so many different, I suppose, what's the word? Tiers, yeah, and some are more wealthy and more pronounced than others, and other people then still probably have nothing, but yet they're still very active and highly involved, you know. People with big mansions and people living in caravans, you know, they're worlds apart. So how do you bring them all together to try and, you know what I mean, do you get someone to focus on the big ones, or do you focus on the small ones and then there may be no big ones? It's how do you meet, how do you balance it?
And it's definitely offering alternatives as well, we were saying, to the lower ranks. You know what I mean? For the higher ranks, they are probably more educated, more possibly middle class, you know, whereas at the bottom ranks where we'd be working, that it's very hard to try and stop them getting involved in crime or continuing to be involved in crime if there's no alternatives. And for many of these communities, there's no alternatives, you know, so to really, that's where the resources, you know, need to be going in on that tier, and then, like you said, more resources into CAB for the top, you know, the higher tiers.
Yeah, I think those are good points, and particularly this focus on, you know, how do you kind of get to a central, or how do you have central agents who kind of coordinate action between these other groups? And so one of the things we've done at our research center at ASU is to say that this is the role that universities should play, is that, you know, university research teams should be working with the police or with social workers or with the Department of Economic Security, which helps with income assistance and those sorts of things. And so rather than requiring those departments to interact with each other, of having trained researchers be the people who are coordinating action among those groups. And that's been effective on a small scale in the prison we've been working with, of bringing in lots of resources for women who are in prison. And so taking in psychologists all the way to nutritionists. ASU is very massive. We have 160,000 students, and so we have lots and lots of faculty who do lots and lots of things. And so drawing on those resources and being able to take them in rather than trying to get the Department of Corrections to do all of those things. And so that's one kind of approach that we've thought about, is the way you can bring these agencies together is to kind of just put that onus on the university. That does come with challenges, but just something I'd want to mention. Any other comments or thoughts? Yeah, Megan.
I have a question. Like, say, you know, here we've removed the dots and it's like they've dispersed. What is to stop someone just taking the place of the black dots straight away?
Right.
How do you kind of keep it disrupted?
Yeah, I mean, this is essentially what you were talking about with drugs, right? If there's demand, something's going to fill the vacuum. And so you can have a network like this. If you remove the players, someone might just step right in. And there's some research looking at how that might be even more problematic. And sometimes when these organized kind of central actors can create enough fear in a network that there isn't as much violence, because local groups won't rival with each other. And when those people were removed, this happened in Baltimore. They took out some group and violence went up because the people were kind of keeping things under control in the neighborhood.
Like a vacuum.
Yeah, so basically younger kids who were scared of some of these older guys who got arrested started shooting each other. And so there are some downsides, and there are these unintended consequences that sometimes come out. But that's a great point of, you know, how do you stop that from happening? Is you got to solve the demand problem, and you can do that through policy. I mean, I say it like it's that easy. That's one approach, and there's some other approaches. But that's a great point, something to think about when you're talking about these interventions. Yeah.
That's the sort of, I mean, you can disrupt, but you've still got the context hasn't change and sometimes disruption can make things worse. But just going back to the CAB thing, I mean, CAB was established in response primarily to Veronica Guerin's murder, and it was established at that very high level. But why can we not seem to create a CAB at a lower level that is focused on harm reduction instead of law enforcement? So you're bringing all the agencies together who are involved in prevention, treatment, harm reduction, to work in that similar type of CAB type approach. Because sometimes the enforcement, let's say the enforcement family, if you want to call it that, seem to be able to work together fairly seamlessly, whether it's customs, the guards, that's, and the local authority even. But sometimes at the lower level, maybe it's the absence of leadership from the bottom up to be able to bring agencies together to deal with that, with the earlier stuff, the early intervention, prevention, harm reduction, etc. So it's just like there's another way of looking at CAB that could be done from the other bottom up.
Would have to be some policy changes and say even just a simple GDPR from a GDPR point of view for sharing information. Now I know there is just can't think of the name of the project that we are say for offences against children, that there is kind of we're moving into that space where TUSLA and the guards and specialist interviewers and all of them are coming to the one base or coming to the one building and working it, so that there is a sort of a blueprint there. But there would say and that's following a lot of policy changes allowing us.
Grooming legislation, grooming?
No, not grooming. No, it's just in relation to, I suppose, crimes against children that.
It's allowing the guards to be able to share information with another agency.
We would have done before, but we're trialing a process where that there is social workers in the same room as the guards, and that information is allowed to flow.
No wrong doors.
So
And that is
and probably allows quicker access to probation services, to JLOs, all that sort of stuff are kind of in the one room.
Yeah.
So I know that there's a trial going on in Cork. I just can't think of the name of the project, but I think it's.
UJARC or the JARC?
No, I think it's based in Esborough of all places. But
Okay.
anyway, so
That's
it
that kind of thing
it is possible, but it takes a lot of policy. As well as the ground up, it has to come from the top down.
Just on that note, I was sharing with the group that I suppose based in Crumlin, there's, I suppose, one of the sergeants there, he's very innovative and he tries to involve, I suppose, the local youth organisations and youth justice workers. So, like, there's a very, I suppose, familiarity with a lot of the Garda that would, in this community. So it's like they can flag certain things with us, and we're able to kind of, I suppose, try to support as best we can or try to remove certain things before they actually kick off, and it's very effective. I gave the example of Halloween night, for example, where it's usually very tense, very volatile. Just as we're starting outreach, the Garda approached us, they would know us quite well, and we're able to kind of, say this person, they're on the verge of being arrested. We've given them so many warnings, our hands are tied, all we can do now is arrest them. And I suppose, there were young people that we knew, and we were able to kind of remove them from the area, and to have that positive intervention. And I suppose it was like, we also have like, say, a Dublin 12 forum, where we're all sitting in one room and we're discussing, I suppose, key issues, key components that exist, and how do we best support such and such a person and such a family that are possibly, going to be problematic in the future, or, there's a young person in the family that's extremely at risk. So there is that kind of information sharing piece, and that is a very positive network, and I think it's very strong, and I think it should be countrywide.
There's like silos of them. Like there's one, the Diamond Group as well, which is the NEIC version of that. I spoke to it, and I was like, if we could take the learning from this group and like spread it to the other groups. So I think they're happening in different ways. Like people are
starting to catch
using their
on.
initiative to do them, and it'd be great to join up the thinking.
I think unfortunately it's a lot of personalities.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
100%.
As in, like in Limerick, because it's so small, it's super. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Everyone knows everything is well known. You know what I mean? There's open communication with just between the guards, probation, whatever it is. But like that, I think a lot of it's personality where, people in specific jobs move on, or things like that can be lost.
Like the sergeant that exists there, he's facilitating and arranging these kind of trainings for us all to kind of do together. Say one example is like he had us all doing consent day training, which is great. You know, it's like the Garda there and youth workers are there, all in the community, and it's also we're getting to know each other as well as kind of learning and you know being able to kind of I suppose deliver the training you know with our young people in the community. There's another one coming up next week. It's about substance abuse, mental health, neurodiversity, and things like this, which is yeah, it's rare that I suppose when I was growing up, yeah, didn't really have
Building
that.
trust, Jalen, what you're talking about there is a core part of communities coming together in a stronger way and mobilising in the right way.
Yeah.
If there is a trust that exists between the local police force, the residents,
Yeah.
people training together, even doing that stuff together, the literature in the States would say that that is massively beneficial for how you might even control crime in an area. Because people start to trust each other.
Yeah.
You trust the police, you're more likely to give information. There's a huge, I don't know, string of events maybe.
Yeah, it's the trust,
Yeah.
but it's also the confidence in that. That a lot of times people were like, I'm not going to call the police because
Yeah.
they're just going to come here and
Yeah.
I'm probably going to get in trouble, or they're not going to come here and do what I want or I expect, and that's just confidence in those institutional actors. But other comments, Owen? I know you had a lot of stuff to say, but
I think
we can always talk later too.
Because I think when you mention folks, the turns like the Boston Gun Project was chatting a bit about that and how like it took maybe David Kennedy and a few from minds from different universities to come together and think about things differently, how you'd solve problems that you just can't apply the same old intervention to. So they had to really kind of dig deep and find out, well, what make gun has been used for this particular, you know, for the incidents of homicide in Boston at that time. Get rid of that person that was dealing that type of gun, and then obviously offer the good stuff. Like they actually brought people from the local gangs into a community centre, put pictures on the wall, and said if you are caught for this now federal offence, you'll have 20 years in prison. So they warned people that if you keep using guns, you will be going to prison. If you stop, there's opportunities for you to move away. And they provided those carrots as well, which is some background to that piece, because you could look into it and I think you'd be very interested in how you could do that focus deterrence.
Yeah, so those are the call-in meetings, and they'd have people come in, even people from rival gangs in there, and having them in that kind of safe space to talk, but also people from the community to come in and say, look, like, you're making it unsafe for my kids to play in the street. And so, like, providing that context was really kind of crucial. And that's not the police department's responsibility. It's not just it's having that particular structure allow those sorts of things to happen.
We talked a bit about family as well in Ireland, and family being a huge part of how people get sucked into activity because it's in their family and it's the way it is. And we don't have black Latino gangs, or you know what I mean. We've got Kinahans and Hutches and names, like you know, it's always the names in this country. And I think we need to recognise that familial connection. Like when we did some of the studies that we did in our own examining criminal networks in Ireland, we noticed that the ones that were weaker or lads that weren't related to each other, just hanging around with each other on the street corner, they were more likely to give information on the other, you know. But if they were family members, really, really hard to infiltrate, break those down, or take out any links, because everyone was connected by blood, and that was a major thing.
Yeah. Any other comments or questions? I think we had just about time.
Yeah.
Well, thanks everyone for being here and participating in the exercise. Sorry the gift card wasn't real, or even usable.
It's a good trick, but it'll only work once.
Yeah.
I'll be walking home anyway, so.
So my information is somewhere in here. Well, I just went to the in there. My information's here. If you have any other questions that pop up, feel free to reach out to me. If you go to the link there, and then that's my email, you can email me if anything pops up, or feel free to email Owen as well. But again, thanks for being here, particularly on a Friday afternoon with torrential wind coming, apparently. But thanks again. Again, if you have questions, feel free to reach out. Yeah, safe travels, everyone. Oh, sure.
I'll get that for you. You got it? Ah, yeah. There we go now.
Sure.
Perfect, thanks.
Thanks.